hope you guys are having a great time here at the Alien event. I'm also hosting a panel at 2 o'clock today, this afternoon, where we're going to talk about the current state of the art with UFOs and stuff. And thank you for being here early. What time is it? 11:30 or something in the morning? 11:45. I'm going to go long. So, screw the next guy. I don't know who's next. But, okay. Yes.
I'm ready to start recording, but stand a little bit more to your left.
You want me in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
More
all
like
right. I will just stand here and block everybody's view of the slides.
Just a little bit. You can
I will just do this when I want you to say something.
Just to not get out of frame past that line.
Okay.
Okay. I'm ready to start the DVD when you are.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
And
all right, everybody, welcome to the Alien event here in Las Vegas, Nevada, a place I just moved to 3 weeks ago, so I'm very happy to be here. Although Dave kind of got out of paying me as much because I wasn't traveling. So anyway, I'm going to talk about information in my book, Ancient Aliens and JFK. We're going to talk about why JFK was killed, and it did have to do with aliens, and I think I can prove that case. I'm going to tell you who, what, why, and no, it was not Woody Harrelson's dad or the smoking man from the X-Files in the drain suit. I don't think it was any of those people. I wish I had a couple more slides to show you, but I've got limitations. I got to get through this quickly. So I'm going to bang it through it. So you're just going to have to trust me on a few things. I'm going to try to get out of the way here as often as possible for you guys that are over there on the left, or I could just stand like this, maybe. Laura, can you see? Can you see the slides there? Hi, Laura. So anyway, and I have about half a dozen copies of the book left if you want to get a signed copy of the book after the presentation, because the presentation is going to be so awesome that you're going to love it. All right, so John F. Kennedy was killed November 22nd, 1963. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows there's been controversy about it from the beginning. Nobody believed the Warren Commission because they didn't tell the truth. There's a lot of things that there's a couple things they got right. There's a lot of things they got wrong, and there's a lot of things that they lied about. So it sort of was the end of innocence. It started this whole process of us not trusting the government anymore. And I think now we're going through a period where we're really learning the painful lessons of this. So how did the Kennedys get started? Well, Joe Kennedy was John F. Kennedy's father. He made his money in bootlegging and insider trading back in the 20s when this was all legal. It was legal to do it. What Congress does today was legal in the 1920s. And he made a lot of money during the Depression. He became almost a billionaire by today's standards. And he had ambitions. He wanted to be the first Irish Catholic president of the United States. He was friends with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And, people today talk about discrimination. The discrimination against Irish people, and especially Irish Catholics back in those days, was horrific. And so he was going to fight that. But he made a big mistake. During the Blitz, he suggested that England should basically make peace with Nazi Germany and give up. And he actually left London during the Blitz and went and hid away in a farm, on a farm somewhere deep in England, and didn't get bombed. And Winston Churchill stood and fought. And so Joe Kennedy's political career basically ended there when Germany conquered France. So he had these two sons, and the main one was actually Joe Kennedy Jr., that guy right there, and he had John F. Kennedy Jr., or Jack as he was known, who was the second son. Well, what's the second son? He's like Prince Harry. He's the party boy, right? So he had a great time. Joe had all the responsibility. Joe was killed because he was trying during World War II to become a war hero. So Joe Sr.'s dreams passed on to the son, but Joe was killed piloting an aircraft. Now, it just so happens that his younger brother, Jack, was commander of PT-109, which was a patrol boat. There's a very famous book about that. He acted heroically. His boat got cut in half by a Japanese submarine, and he swam for, several miles, 2 or 3 miles, with the bit of a life preserver in his mouth and 2 or 3 guys hanging on that were badly injured and burned, and got them to safety, got them to an island. They eventually were rescued. And so he truly was a war hero. Years later, when he was asked, how did you become a war hero? He said, it was pretty easy. The Japanese cut my patrol boat in half. So that's how I became a war hero. After the war, he did some recuperation, and he did it in a place called Hot Springs, Arizona, where there was a nurse there named Virginia Cassidy, who, by the way, is Bill Clinton's mother. So you figured that one out, okay? And gee, isn't it amazing that Bill Clinton showed up at the White House when he was 14 years old, and the only one of this group of students that was there that got a picture taken shaking the hand of President Kennedy was Bill Clinton. Isn't it funny how those things work? I think I might have a slide of that in there. After the war, his dad, because he was injured, he was badly injured, he had back pain for the rest of his life, he was assigned to cover the post-war period in Germany. And he was assigned to this guy right here. That is James Forrestal. Here's a picture of Kennedy, and there's James Forrestal. James Forrestal was Secretary of the Navy, and they were touring post-war Berlin. This is actually Hitler's office in Berlin, where the two men were photographed. Again, there's another shot of him trailing behind Forrestal, the man in the hat. So he was doing reports for Hearst newspapers, and he wasn't a bad reporter. He was a pretty good writer. Here's another shot of that. This is a great picture because in this picture, you see two future presidents of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, and first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. So in my book, Hidden Agenda, I talked about some of the things they did and where they went. And it's really interesting because in the post-war period, Hitler spent an awful lot of time and energy defending Norway. The Russians are on the Eastern Front. They're crossing into Poland, crossing into Germany. The Allies are attacking from the West, and Hitler's putting most of his resources into Norway. Well, in Norway, there was a bunch of secret research that had been stored there. There was a bunch of long-range bombers, and they were working on with something called the Nazi Bell. Now, if you look at George Patton's movements, the Third Army, he sweeps across France, they cross the Rhine. That's when he famously, like in the movie Patton, he tells Eisenhower, you give me 400,000 gallons of gas and I'll be in Berlin in 2 weeks and we'll end this war and we'll beat the Russians. And in fact, I'll make, if there's any action, I'll make it look like the Russians started it, right? So, but they didn't let him do that. They diverted him to an area called Silesia. Well, in Silesia was this area right here of Poland was the secret German high technology physics research. And later on, guys like Hermann Oberth, who was a famous Nazi rocket scientist, said we had help with all these things we're experimenting with from the people of other worlds. He said that flatly in interviews, and he repeated it to Eric von Daniken. Well, one of the things there is what they call the fly trap, which is this support test rig structure here. It still exists today in Poland. Nobody really knows what it was for, but it's strongly suspected it had something to do with the Nazi Bell. The Nazi Bell was an anti-gravity reactor. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, we can go into all this stuff, read Dr. Joseph Farrell's books. They're great. It was an anti-gravity reactor, and it basically was able to negate the effects of gravity. And it became, if you look at the German flying saucers, the standard classic flying saucer look with the cupola in the middle, it fits right in there. That's why flying saucers are shaped like that, at least the ones we build, because they have to be, because that's where the reactor goes. So, there's all kinds of these interesting rumors. But the point I was going to make about this is Forrestal toured that area along with Jack Kennedy right after the war in early 1946. So if that was technology from other worlds, then John F. Kennedy would have been exposed to it. Also, there was a big famous meeting in Potsdam, post-war meeting between Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt, and might have been Truman at that point. And Forrestal brought one assistant, one adjutant with him. The man he brought was John F. Kennedy. So whatever secrets were exchanged there, they knew about. So after the war, early 46, Kennedy decides he's going to run for Congress because now the weight of the family legacy has fallen on John Kennedy. It's fallen on Jack. Joe is dead. So now it's the second son. He has to step forward, kind of like the movie Dune or something, right? Except there was only one son. So he ran for Congress. He got elected. But his ambition was the presidency. That's what Joe wanted him to do, was to become president. So he served as congressman for a couple years, but he was a single man, and we all know about John Kennedy's habits, okay? We all know what he was like with women. And Angie Dickinson, very famous actress in the 1960s, said that being with President Kennedy was the most exciting 26 seconds of her life. he was president. So they married him off. They found a really good girl, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. They married him off to her. And of course, he cheated on her a lot. There were issues. But he now had a wife. He had the appearance of a stable home life. Then he ran for the U.S. Senate at the 1956 Democratic Convention. After he'd been elected senator, he gave a great speech. He was really well received. And then in 1960, he decided to run for president. His main opposition was Lyndon B. Johnson, who would later succeed him as president. Well, Lyndon B. Johnson he underestimated Kennedy. He debated him on TV. Guess who won that one, right? John F. Kennedy won. And he became the nominee. But Kennedy needed Texas to win. So against the wishes of his brother Robert, by the way, did you guys hear that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., somebody tried to assassinate him yesterday, running for president? There was a guy in his security detail, pretending to be in his security detail with a fake U.S. Marshal's badge and a couple of guns, and his private security caught him. So pretty wild stuff. And so Kennedy made the biggest mistake of his life. He chose Lyndon B. Johnson as his running mate because he needed Texas and Illinois to win. And it's pretty funny because it was a very close election between Nixon and Kennedy. Nixon had the flu the week before. He spent time in the hospital. He was thin. He was gaunt. He was wearing a light gray suit. Didn't look good with the background. Kennedy's wearing a dark suit. He was tanned. He was relaxed. He'd spent the week in Florida with, Frank Sinatra and a bunch of girls. Okay, so John F. Kennedy was really relaxed. And, again, people that heard the debate on the radio thought Nixon won. People that saw it on TV thought Kennedy won. More people watched it on TV. So it was a super close election, but that was what gave Kennedy the edge. And he eventually won the election, the electoral votes. This is how the blue is the Democrat and the red is the Republican states. He got Texas, he got Illinois. There was very, very substantial evidence of fraud, scholastically accepted. People did papers of voter fraud, but it was super close. Nixon ultimately didn't contest it, and Kennedy was declared president. And it's funny because people said, well, if Joe Kennedy was really behind all this voter fraud and everything, why wasn't it a landslide? And Joe Kennedy supposedly said, well, I didn't pay for a landslide. So anyway, it was going to be a close election because Eisenhower was popular, Nixon was popular. It was going to be a close election. So Kennedy gets into office, and literally the first thing he does is he gives a speech in April of '61, a couple months after he's been elected, and he calls out the intelligence agencies and the secret societies. This is called The President and the Press. It's the name of the speech. And to quote it, it says, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and I can't do Kennedy. Chowda, I can say that. But and historically opposed to secret societies. Gee, I wonder who he's talking about there. Masons, the Illuminati, somebody. Secret oaths and the secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. So he basically said, I'm declaring war on the deep state or the alphabet agencies, and I want you, the press, to help me. Well, they didn't help him very much. Anyway, and then he decided right after that in May that we need to go to the moon. He gave the famous "We choose to go to the moon" speech, where do all the other things that are really hot, that kind of stuff. I'm working on it, Kennedy. It's not very good. That pissed a lot of people off. And some of the people that pissed off was an organization called MJ12 or Majestic 12. Now, there are disputes about the documents. There are disputes about whether MJ12 really existed, but Stanton Friedman, during his lifetime, famous UFO researcher, read his books, he's got it all, okay? This organization existed. There are references and memos to it. President Eisenhower had a briefing document, which I think is authentic. A lot of other people who are document experts think it was authentic, but this raised their eyebrows. This is an example. This is a document from President Truman, who is directing James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense, to be ready for the Operation Majestic 12 meeting coming up. Or we're going to create this organization that had 12 members. I'm not sure why this is in Spanish, but the original 12 members, and they had a ranking. MJ1 was the top guy. That was the director of CIA. So you had Roscoe Hillenkoetter, and you had Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was not of the Bush family, but was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. And he's the guy who was signed a theoretical physicist to analyze all of Nikola Tesla's papers and to decide which ones should be classified and declassified after his death. That physicist's name was John Trump. He's the uncle of President Trump. So don't tell me that he didn't sit his nephew on his knee one day and tell him all about everything that Nikola Tesla knew and everything they knew inside the government. Other interesting names on here, Dr. Donald Menzel. Why is he important? Because he debunked UFOs. He was always talking about there were no aliens. He was the chief debunker. Well, he passed away in 1972. But he had a mentor. He was a mentor to a young protege at Harvard named Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan, up until 1972, was very enthusiastic about aliens and UFOs and ancient aliens. He wrote about ancient aliens. And then suddenly in 1972, he flipped and started attacking anybody who put anything out about the face on Mars and things like that. Gee, I wonder if there's a connection there. So the MJ-12's job was to oversee the policy of the US government regarding aliens. The third member, MJ3, was Secretario James V. Forrestal. I got to fix that. So there are different references. Here's a Majestic 12 meeting that was scheduled. There's all kinds of documentation. It's pretty interesting stuff. A few years ago, a new document came out from something called the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. Now, it's weird when you start using like ChatGPT and AI, because you find things out that you didn't know and that you can't seem to find anywhere on the internet. And one of them is that apparently the IPU, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, did exist. It was a 1950s British organization. It was under the Ministry of Defense, and their job was to investigate UFOs and UFO sightings. So I didn't know that that actually existed before I'd seen this document. So anyway, this document goes through and it talks about the Roswell situation, talks about the crashed alien flying saucers, the bodies, the biologics, all this interesting stuff. And then on page 10, it talks about how James Forrestal has either been briefed or is going to be briefed very soon. And there's only one member of Congress who knows about aliens. John F. Kennedy from Massachusetts knows about Roswell and the aliens. And they think, well, he found it from a source in Congress, close to the Secretary of the Air Force. That was a guy named Symington. Do you guys remember Fife Symington, the governor of Arizona, during the Phoenix Lights? That's his nephew. So again, there's all these family connections. I mean, we could do a whole presentation just on doppelgangers and family connections. So what happened to James Forrestal is pretty bizarre. He was the Secretary of Defense, the first Secretary of Defense of the US. And then after a while, all of these stories started appearing in the newspapers about him, about how he was crazy. And he wanted to appease the Soviet Union. And he didn't want to make peace. He was going to lead to war because he was a weak Secretary of Defense. And just all these attacks. And then he was hospitalized at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And then he committed suicide by throwing himself out of a 16th floor window with his pajama drawstring around his neck, having already choked himself to death. So he was murdered. And the reason he was murdered is because there is some indication there's a great book called The Mysterious Death of James Forrestal. His diaries were redacted. A lot of documents that he wrote were destroyed. But the argument is, the thought is that he began to get attacked in the press because he advocated that we should just tell the people about aliens, that they're here, we should tell the people. And the rest of MJ-12 did not agree with that. So in May of 1963, just a few months before his death, President Kennedy gave a speech at Arlington National Cemetery, as presidents do. This, I think, is the only time he'd gone there on Memorial Day. When it was over, he had them drive him to a particular spot in Arlington National Cemetery where he was seen to spend the next 45 minutes standing there in very quiet with his own thoughts. The grave was that of James Forrestal. He was friends with Forrestal. They were very close. They were close with the Kennedy family. And it's interesting because if Forrestal was somebody who wanted to tell the people, then it's almost like Kennedy was going there to pay his last respects, knowing that what he was about to embark on was very dangerous. Well, what was he about to embark on? He was about to propose to the Russians to Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, and he first did this in Vienna at their first summit together, that we not go to the moon in competition, but that we go to the moon in cooperation. That to bridge the gap between the two nuclear superpowers, the way to peace was to work together rather than fight against each other. That led Khrushchev to conclude that Kennedy was weak, so he put missiles in Cuba, offensive nuclear weapons in Cuba. It led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy stood him down. They were able to come up with the blockade, which is pretty brilliant stuff, and avert the crisis. But then Kennedy was surrounded by members of secret societies. For a guy who had actually railed against secret societies, he was surrounded by them. This is James Webb meeting President Kennedy for the first time after he'd assigned him as the director of NASA. James Webb was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, as was Buzz Aldrin. Well, he was 32nd when he went to the moon. They made him a 33rd after he brought back the Masonic ceremonial apron thing that he used in the lunar module. Did you know that Neil and Buzz performed a Masonic ceremony in the lunar module before they went on the first moonwalk? Yeah, they did. Here he is at NASA headquarters, surrounded by 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason Lyndon Johnson, James Webb, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, Kurt DeBus, SS, Nazi, that was a secret society, Alan Dulles, director of CIA, looking at something up on the big board. And then he proposed it again after the Cuban Missile Crisis in secret, and this is according to Khrushchev's son Sergei, that we go to the moon together. That again, you know, we came this close to war, let's not do this again. And Khrushchev thought about it, but again, he rejected it. Finally, Kennedy had had enough. So in September of 1963, he went to the UN and he gave a speech at the UN. And you know, I'm just gonna tell you something. I look at this picture. This is a picture of Kennedy, I think it was September 20th, 1963, at the UN. And he's giving a speech. Who's the giant chair for? That chair just sits there. Now, William Henry from Ancient Aliens says the empty chair is symbolic of the Messiah, right? But I call this the Anunnaki chair at the UN. And I mean, it's ridiculous. They say, oh, well, it's for the speaker to sit in before he's announced. And then I saw, who was it, Chavez from Venezuela. I saw a video. And this chair is so big that he literally, the arms were like this. I mean, this guy is 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", and I mean, it's ridiculous. It's made for a giant. It is not made for a normal-sized person. But Kennedy gave a speech, and in that speech, he said, finally in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Now, there's one thing I don't have a lot of in here. I've written Ancient Aliens on the Moon. I've written Dark Mission. I've written a bunch of books about the moon. And we've all talked about this. I just would like everybody to stipulate for me that there's technology, leftover alien technology on the moon. That's the premise of this whole thing. I can prove that 6 different ways. I can show you tons of pictures, but I don't have time for it today. So that would be why the idea of going to the moon together with our Cold War enemies, the Soviet Union, would have been deeply frightening to the power brokers in America who wanted to keep the Cold War going because it's profitable. Well, the reaction was not good to this speech. They made jokes about Kennedy. They made political cartoons. This is one with Khrushchev and Kennedy in a rocket. And Khrushchev is saying to him, what's he saying? I told you this would happen if you didn't stop talking about it. And he just kept talking about it. There's Kennedy and Khrushchev being sent to the moon together. But the interesting thing is that Khrushchev's son, Sergei, then came out and said, after the 3rd time, he took a walk with his father at his dacha in Russia. And took a long walk. He said it was either the last week of October or the first week of November, 1963. And his father, Nikita Khrushchev, told him, I am going to accept Kennedy's offer this time. And the reason I'm going to accept it is because we were ahead of them before, but now they're ahead of us. And if they beat us, it will be a huge national embarrassment. And we should stop this fighting. We should try to. So Kennedy and Khrushchev were on the same page in a sense that they wanted to stop the escalation of hostilities between Russia, the Soviet Union, and America. Are there still people today trying to make Russia the enemy? Yeah, your enemy is not in Russia, it's in Washington, D.C. Just so, did I say that out loud? I'm sorry.
I agree. I just walked in and I heard it.
So just a few days later, yeah, by the way, Mitt Romney, pie, don't let the door hit you in the ass. Kennedy issued on November 12th, 1963, a National Security Action Memo, and it directs James Webb, the 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason director of NASA, to open an office to begin to cooperate and share information with the Soviet Union, with the Soviet Space Forces. There's a second memo issued the same day. This is authenticated by the Kennedy Library. There's a second memo issued the same day. It says, we're going to development of the program of substantive cooperation with the Soviet Union in the field of outer space. I assume you will work closely with the Department of State and other agencies as appropriate, and it's signed off and it's authenticated. There's a second memo. Dr. Bob Wood is a very famous, he's now a documents analyst. He was a physicist and an engineer, worked for Hughes Aerospace Corporation. He's the guy who he was given $2 million in like 1963 or 66, which is $400 million today to study UFOs. The board said, we want to know what UFOs are. So they hired Bob Wood, who then hired the best researcher he could find, Stanton Friedman. So that's how Stan got his start in researching UFOs, was through Dr. Bob Wood. This guy is now a documents expert, and he's looked at this and he says, okay, 90% chance this is real. This one is more shocking because it says, I have instructed James Webb to develop a program with the Soviet Union. That's what the other memo says. So this memo confirms the previous memo, and then it says, it would be very helpful. This is to Alan Dulles, the director of CIA, who is also a member of what? MJ-12, right? And he says, it would be very helpful if you would have the high threat cases reviewed with the purpose of identification of bona fide, as opposed to the classified USA and USAF and CIA sources. So what is he saying? He's saying, we want you to help NASA identify the difference between our own secret space program stuff and bona fide alien visitation, so that they can make a clear distinction between the knowns and the unknowns, and data sharing with NASA where unknowns are a factor to make sure you do all this stuff. So this is a directive to CIA to start doing the same thing that NASA has just been directed to do. Now, we don't know for a fact, well, I do, but you're not convinced yet, that this led to John F. Kennedy's murder, okay? All we know is that 10 days after he issued these memos, which he would not have done unless he already had an answer from Khrushchev, I will accept your offer, because there's a lot of political blowback on Kennedy. He would not have done this unless he knew that the Russians were going to accept the offer. And all we know for sure is that 10 days after he issued these orders, he was dead. Okay, so Majestic 12, there is another document. This is all documented. It's amazing. It's so cool. There's this thing called the Byrne Memo. And the story behind it is that a guy's father was a high-level intelligence agent. He had a bunch of documents around the house. He went to burn one. The son rescued it out of the fire. The Byrne Memo is chilling. And again, Dr. Bob Wood has looked at it. He's examined the original. He's looked at the ink. He's looked at the dating, the parchment paper, everything. He says this is real. And in it, it talks about false flag operations to distract from anything relating to aliens. It talks about terrorist acts on American soil to take care of that. It talks about environmental poisoning. It talks about all kinds of scary stuff, all the false flag stuff that you hear about today, like Lahaina. Laura and I were last night, we went to, we're passing an art gallery in Planet Hollywood, and they lost their gallery there, and they told us absolutely chilling stuff about what really happened there. It's terrifying. And this is an MJ-12 document issued apparently by Alan Dulles, MJ-1, to the rest of the organization. Now, there's other stuff in there that's really terrifying. Talks about wet works, which is murder. It talks about if the president asks any of you other members about UFOs, your job is to stonewall him until we can all be there. And then we will all lie to him together, is basically what it says, because Kennedy has been poking around. So this is hard to read, especially in this lighting. But this is the part that really is damning. It says, as you must know, Lancer has been making inquiries regarding our activities, which we cannot allow. So Lancer is code. Who's Lancer?
Yeah.
Lancer was John F. Kennedy. So this document directly traces MJ-12 to, and those words to me are chilling. We cannot allow this. So 10 days, now that memo is dated to October of 1963, most likely. So they were like, okay, we got to get rid of this guy. This is before, we're thinking about getting rid of this guy. This is before Kennedy issues the National Security Action Memos on November 12th, before Khrushchev has accepted his offer to go to the moon collectively. So there's a proof film. It's gruesome. I don't remember if I have a shot of the headshot here. Yeah, I do. Well, let's pass on that. Frame 313, where he gets shot in the head. So the story goes that he was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. 3 shots from behind, 6th floor window, Texas School Book Depository. I've stood there in the window just next to it. I might have been able to make that shot. Oswald was not a terrible marksman, as is often stated. He was an okay marksman, right? So he fired 3 shots. He was witnessed firing 3 shots. He was also involved with a lot of weird people. I mean, he got fired from one job because he spent his whole time in the adjacent CIA, FBI carpool garage rather than doing the job he was supposed to do. He went to Mexico to meet with the master of this KGB master of assassins to get a job. They told him, no, thank you, we're good. And, you know, he emigrated to Russia. He came back, and he's also part of the Fair Play for Cuba committee. Here he is passing out pamphlets with his good buddy, a guy named Cruz, who is the father of Ted Cruz, the current senator from Texas. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's a little
Raul Cruz, the father of Ted Cruz. So there's some other weird books out there. I like NASA Nazis and JFK. There's a lot of interesting information in here talking about how there was a secret NASA organization that Werner von Braun and others were part of. And it also talks about how part of this organization that they call DISC, cute name, right? Also involved Jack Ruby, right? This is Jack Ruby with some of the girls from his nightclub, okay? Nightclub. It's not really a nightclub. It starts with an S, but we all know what it was. He's the one, of course, who killed Lee Harvey Oswald the day after the assassination in the basement of the Dallas Police Department. To this day, nobody knows how he got in there. Nobody knows who let him in. Nobody knows what door he came through. Nobody knows how he got a gun in there. He didn't have a press pass. He had nothing. But there's video. There's well, not video, film of Lee Harvey Oswald the night before as they're interrogating him after he was arrested. Jack Ruby's all over the place. It's like you can see Jack Ruby in the background everywhere. So how did Jack Ruby get in there? Now, in 2017, Trump said, I'm going to release these remaining documents after consultation with General Kelly, the CIA, and other agencies. I will be releasing all JFK files other than the names and addresses of any mentioned person who's still living. I'm doing this for reasons of just full disclosure and transparency in order to put all the conspiracy theories to rest. Do you think it did that? No, and they redacted. They did hold back. He changed his mind and held back a few documents that he was asked to. Here's one of the documents that was released, which is really fascinating. It says, there's a source. This is FBI New York. This is part of the document release. It's absolutely authentic. There was a source who said that the president was actually assassinated by a Dallas police officer, Tippit. Also, that 1 week before the assassination, that patrolman Tippit, the head of the John Birch Society, which was a very right-wing organization in the 60s and 70s, in Dallas, and an unnamed third party, probably Oswald, were seen together in Jack Ruby's nightclub. So Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and a cop who they think may have shot the president were all meeting a week before the assassination in Jack Ruby's strip club. Interesting, huh? Okay, so Dealey Plaza. Now, there's all kinds of crackpot stuff out there about this, right? Anybody see that movie, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick? It's on, yeah. Okay, first 45 minutes is great. Rest of it's bullshit. Just let me fill it in for it. 9/11 stuff, Kennedy stuff. There weren't 16 assassins. You know, Woody Harrelson's dad was not there. But there was a lot of stuff going on in Dealey Plaza. This is right about the area where the president was hit by the headshot. This is the sixth floor window of the school book depository, where Oswald supposedly shot from. You had people on the grassy knoll area. You had people like Abraham Zapruder was up here. And you had Oswald supposedly up in this window, right? So he was actually witnessed by this guy, a man named, I think, Brennan, who testified at various times to the Warren Commission. He saw a man in a white t-shirt, thin man, dark hair, white t-shirt, rifle with a scope, 1, 2, 3 shots at the president. Now, I think personally Oswald missed 2 of the 3 shots, but the one shot went into the president's back and came out his throat, all through soft tissue. And most people don't know this, but it severed the vagus nerve, which is the nerve that tells the heart to beat and the lungs to breathe. So the president would have died from that anyway. But of course, a few seconds later, there was the headshot. So there's all this stuff about the magic bullet. Oh, the bullet had to change directions, and Connally got hit by the same bullet. The magic bullet theory is BS. Robert F. Kennedy the other day said, oh, the magic bullet theory can be put to rest. I say not so fast. But the interesting thing about it is that we now know, remember how the magic bullet ended up on a stretcher, John Connally's stretcher, and nobody knows how it got there. Well, now a Secret Service agent named Paul Landis says, I put it there. He said he found it in the limo. Now, he thinks he found it behind President Kennedy's seat. I think it makes more sense that he would have found it behind Connally's seat. But he says he found it, and again, everybody was in a daze. They didn't know what to do, and he put it on the stretcher thinking it might help the doctors figure something out. He finally admitted it after 60 years. But the reality is that Kennedy was above and outboard of Connally. Connally was inboard on a jump seat, and the bullet basically had from the 6th floor window, it flies in a straight line. So it looks like what happened is that it came out of Kennedy, and then when that happens, it tumbled. So it hit Connally sideways and ended up, through his wrist and all that stuff. We can debate that endlessly, but I think the evidence is really strong for that. So also you have to understand that area, and I was there a couple of years ago, Elm Street, it's curvy, it curves, and it goes downhill. So it actually made it an easier shot. We know Oswald missed the first shot. It actually chipped and cut a guy. And the third shot was kind of overlapping with the headshot. So this is the bullet, the magic bullet. Everybody says, oh, it looks great. It's pristine. How can it look like that if it went through all this bone and tissue and everything? But they only show you one side of it. They don't show you what it looks like from the other side, which is it's flat. That is consistent with it striking Connally sideways. So I'm going to say the magic bullet theory is still alive and well. Now, the other thing, too, is that there were lots of other people filming the assassination or filming what they thought was the parade. Marie Muchmore was standing in the grass. A guy named Orville Nix was standing right here. And this is the area of the so-called picket fence. Now, a lot of people say, most people that were there said they thought that the last shot came from the grassy knoll, okay? This is the Marie Muchmore film, a clip of it. This is not real. This is an artifact of the limousine. This is a stabilized version. And you've got these guys up on the stairs. You've got this lady in the black is Mary Mormon, who will become very important in a moment. This lady here with the headscarf is the Babushka lady, later identified as Beverly Oliver. She says she was filming, and she was filming up towards the grassy knoll, and the FBI asked for her film, and they never gave it back. So, and she would like to see that. These are, this is Bill, I forget their names, Bill and the Myers or something like that. They were standing on the grass. There is no barrier there. It's just open grass. So those are the people that are standing there. Now, I happened to do a stop. I happened to stop the Marie Muchmore film. I just pause right there. I was going to take a screen cap. And when I looked at it, I realized if you look at this, and we don't have a lot of contrast on the screen, we got lights on, but can you see this right here in front of the president's head? And it's red. I didn't change the color. That's the color. It's like a red mist in front of his forehead. And so I emphasized it a little bit more. Also, you can see the back of his head looks fine, but the front of his hair is all standing up, and there's this red mist in front of him. So if somebody who's really good at video analysis and screen captures, maybe AJ over at the Y-Files can look at this. I mean, the hair is pushed back in the front of his head, sticking straight up. There's a mist of red in front of his head, and the back of his head is completely intact. So if, as the Warren Commission says, the shot came from the back and exited the front, the back of the head should be disturbed. Instead, what we see pretty clearly is that the front of the head is disturbed and there's already blood. So what you're looking at, and this is gruesome, but what you're looking at is the bullet is partially already in the president's head when that exact screen cap was taken. Because remember, these are like 18 frames per second, Super 8mm films. So they take one picture every 18th of a second. That's how you get motion pictures. And to me, okay, I'm done. He was shot from the front, right? He was shot from the front. The Orville Nix film shows that when the shot happens, all of the Dallas police officers that are on motorcycles, they all stop. And look at them. Where are they all looking? They're looking up there. They're looking up there. They're looking up there. That is the grassy knoll. This is the pergola that's still there. So every single one of them knows the shot, that a shot came from up there. Here they are, they're stopping. This is another frame a little bit later on. This guy, I think that's his arm, and as they're rolling forward, that's the flesh of his arm, and that's his shirt sleeve. So he's doing this, pointing up there. And they all stop and they get up there, right? Well, the question becomes, what would they find when they got up there? Well, this is the Mary Mormon photograph, the lady in the black I showed you earlier. She took a Polaroid of the president just a split second before the fatal headshot. Now, in this particular photograph, people started studying. There was Jack White and Gary Mack. A couple of one guy was a photo expert, the other guy, Gary Mack, was a researcher. And they started studying the Mary Mormon photograph. And right up here, they saw this bright spot, which they thought was a little weird. So they started working with an original negative of the Polaroid made from the Mary Mormon original, which a lot of people you can't get your hands on anymore, from, I think they got it from the Dallas Police Department, if I recall. It's in the book. Well, a man named Gordon Arnold came out in this presentation that was done, a show that was done by A&E in 1991 or 92 called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. You can look it up, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, go to YouTube, episode 2, The Forces of Darkness. And it starts out with Beverly Oliver telling her story, and then it goes to Gordon Arnold. Well, Gordon Arnold says that in 1963, he'd just gotten out of basic training. He went down to see the sights of the city because he was on a 3-day leave, took his mom's Super 8 camera, and went down there. He's like, well, there's a parade here. There's a parade or something. There's all these people lined up. I'm going to film the parade. So he was on the overpass, and he says a guy with a government badge ID said, you can't be up here. So he moved. Then he said, you can't be here either. So he moved again, and where he moved was right over here next to the tree in front of the picket fence. Okay? There are films that I've seen and I've lost. I don't know how I lost this, but it's really hard to find, of a puff of smoke coming up from the trees in the grassy knoll. You can see a puff of smoke. And yes, the ammo that Oswald and or another killer might have been using could have created puffs of smoke. In the motorcade behind the president, two cars back, was another limousine with Vice President Johnson, his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, who would later become the First Lady, and Senator Ralph Yarborough of Texas. They were in the limo, two cars behind the president. And Yarborough said, when I heard a shot go off and I realized what it was, I saw a man jump and dive back against the wall. And I thought to myself, well, there's an infantryman who's been trained, who knows when you hear fire, you hit the deck. So Yarborough saw him, and he testified twice. He basically said, yeah, I saw this guy dive back to the wall. Now, some people have said it was Gail and Bob Newman. I finally remember their names. Bob and Gail Newman is what he saw, but there's no wall there. This is the street where the car went by. They dove down. It wasn't them. He's not talking about them. There's no wall there. So clearly he's talking about maybe Gordon Arnold. So here's the shot. Here's the area. They started doing analysis on it. And this is not Photoshop. This is literally make an enlargement, expose it, take a look at it. It's all analog chemical processes from the 1990s before Photoshop existed. So what you see is somebody standing there. Now Arnold said, I was wearing my my winter uniform, little overseas cap, medallion on it. I had my mom's camera, so he's wearing camouflage. And he said, the shot rang out. And when I hit the deck, a policeman came around the corner and he pointed his gun at me. And he said, were you filming? And I said, yeah. And he said, give me your camera. And he said, I can't, that's my mom's camera. You know, you say weird things when you got a gun pointed at you, right? And he said, give me your film. So he took the film out and gave it to the policeman, who then disappeared around the picket fence and he never saw him again. But one interesting thing he mentioned about the policeman, he wasn't wearing a hat. And so when you look at this picture, you see what's known as badge man. There's his shoulders. That's his elbow. That's his elbow. That is a muzzle flash from a rifle he's holding. Okay. That's his head. And notice he's not wearing a hat. This is probably Gordon Arnold because look, his right arm is holding something in front of his face. That's the movie camera. And he's leaning over as if the shot just went past him. Now, this is a version done by A&E where they enhanced it even more. And you can pretty much see that this guy has he's got a badge. He's got an epaulet on there, a little insignia, which is Dallas Police. So they call this guy Badge Man. Now, other people have said, you know, a lot of stuff about this, but here is the Dallas policeman's uniform of the day. That's the bright spot. That's the badge. That, by the way, is like a John Birch side. He says. Well, we'll get to it, Dave. We're getting there. So this here, this is the badge, and it goes up over the shoulder. That is a guy dressed as a Dallas policeman, which is a really, really brilliant plan, right? So you have Senator Yarborough, who confirmed that he saw probably Gordon Arnold diving from the shot. You have people thinking there was a shot up on the grassy knoll. And you have this photograph. Now, there are people that have said, oh, the badge man can't exist. He'd have to be 40 feet tall and 30 feet behind him because of the geometry of the picture and all this other BS. Bullshit. This is Google Earth. This is taken from the street, from Elm Street, the exact area where Gordon Arnold said he was. Right in here, that's just what, a 5'7" woman? Okay, I went there myself. Let's see if I've got my pictures. Yeah, I went there myself and took pictures. That's right where Gordon Arnold said he was. That's right where this shot supposedly came from. That's the picket fence. That's behind the picket fence. Now this railing was not there at all at that time. And the X out there is where the president was shot. So let me just tell you, I'm not a good rifle shot. I know several people who are. And if the limo's moving at 5 or 10 miles an hour, you know, I could have made the shot. Maybe not the first time, but a good marksman definitely could have made the headshot from that vantage point. So the question then becomes, you know, who are these people? This appears to be Gordon Arnold. I think there's a colorized version. This is the colorized version. That's his uniform. That's the camera. There's his overseas cap. He's leaning away from the shot that the badge man has just fired. So we have these miracles where they've actually caught this information, these pictures right in line. So again, you go back to the president was actually assassinated by a Dallas police officer. Well, most people don't know this, but Lee Harvey Oswald was never arrested for, nor was he charged with the murder of John F. Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with the murder of a Dallas policeman 30 minutes after the assassination on a Dallas street. Do you know what the name of that Dallas police officer was? J.D. Tippit. They met up on the street. There was an exchange of words. Oswald pulled out a pistol and put 6 bullets into J.D. Tippit. This is the scene of the crime. So they followed Oswald into the theater. They arrested him, yada, yada, yada. Now, again, we have this picture of the badge man. The badge man has a very interesting hairline. He's got a wedge-shaped baldness pattern. Gee, who else has that? He's got ears that kind of stick out. Gee, who else has that? Look at that ear and that ear. He's got very thick, dark eyebrows. So does the badge man. The badge man, the gunner on the grassy knoll, is J.D. Tippit. It's Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, and as Arnold described, he does not have a hat on. So the matchup is perfect. There's no question that that's a second gunman. There's acoustic evidence that was examined by the House Committee on Assassinations in '78. They concluded 2 overlapping shots at the end. Oswald's 3rd shot and somebody else's 4th shot. It was Tippit fired the 4th shot. It was Tippit that fired the headshot. So then you have Jack Ruby come along the next day, and the Warren Commission says he wasn't in Dealey Plaza. Oh yeah? Who's that guy in Dealey Plaza half an hour after the assassination? So they've lied to you about all this because they didn't want you looking into Jack Ruby and J.D. Tippit. And Ruby, of course, then went on and killed Oswald the next day. So the setup is really perfect. Oswald and Tippit kill the president. Oswald has orders to kill Tippit, so he kills Tippit. Ruby has orders to kill Oswald, so he kills Oswald. And then Jack Ruby is the single point failure, and he never talked. He made noises about talking, but he never talked. So, okay, how did this whole thing come off? Who put the whole thing together? And again, I'm going to go back to NASA and Johnson and the going to the moon. The night before the assassination, Kennedy had a dinner in Fort Worth. I believe it was Fort Worth? Yeah, Houston, with Congressman, this guy, Congressman Albert Thomas. He wore bow ties. He was the guy who got the Johnson Space Center not only named for his best buddy, Lyndon Johnson, but put in Houston. You know, did you ever think about that? When they launched the Apollo missions from Florida, and then Houston takes over. Why didn't they just put mission control in Florida, where the spacecraft was? Because Congressman Albert Thomas was known as the congressman from NASA. He controlled the House Ways and Means Committee. He controlled all the funding for NASA. Anything had to go through him. If Kennedy wanted to go to the moon, Albert Thomas had to approve it. And Thomas pretended to be Kennedy's best friend, but he was harshly critical of Kennedy's public proposal to go to the moon with the Russians. He didn't believe in it. He didn't accept it. When they landed at Love Field in Dallas, he and Jackie, President Kennedy and Jackie, again, remember, Johnson is a Scottish Rite Freemason, right? Symbolism. Now in Texas, the yellow rose is popular, the yellow rose of Texas. And at every previous appearance that was made, they gave Jackie Kennedy yellow roses. When they landed at Love Field, 2 hours before her husband's head was blown off, they gave her red roses. Well, what do red roses mean in Texas? It means blood, means death, means we're going to kill your husband. And there's actually, and I've gone through this, is in the book. I actually went through and found a website about that, and she actually commented, they gave me red roses. Why did they give me red? You know, she was so innocent. Why did they give me red roses? Because they were going to kill your husband. So we've all seen this picture, the famous picture after President Kennedy's been declared dead. He's in Air Force One. Dean Acheson is there, presidential aide. Jackie's stunned. She's got her husband's blood all over her dress. They made her stand up there. It was absolutely cruel. And he takes the oath of office and he's all solemn. Who's this guy? The bow tie. Give me 3 guesses. That's the congressman from NASA, Congressman Albert Thomas. So you've seen this picture. You don't know who that guy is, but you've seen this picture. There's Lady Bird. You haven't seen the next picture, in all likelihood. Here's the next picture. 2 seconds later, after the oath is done, Johnson turns to his right, stares right at Congressman Albert Thomas. If you look at his face, you can see, and it's crinkled up in a smile. Thomas is smiling, and what else is he doing? Winking. We got the son of a bitch. We got him. So there's lots of reports, other documents that talk about how there were people that said they knew beforehand there was going to be an assassination, something weird was going to happen in Dallas. KGB was in possession of data pointing to indicate President Johnson was responsible. Johnson was like the bag man. They went to Johnson and said, we're going to make you president if you go along with this, and don't say anything, and convince Kennedy to make sure he goes to Texas and we'll take him out there. Now, again, you may ask yourself, Oswald was an unstable character, but I'm positive he was in the 6-4 window, and I'm positive he fired 3 shots. That's me. I know there were 3 shots fired from there because 2 other witnesses heard the shots right above them and heard the casings rolling off. And Oswald was there. We know all that stuff. Why would you pick an unstable guy like Oswald and then this Dallas guy Tippit? Because of the urgency of the national security action memos. Because Kennedy was actually implementing with Khrushchev the process of going to the moon and revealing the ancient alien technology on the moon to the Russians. So that's why they acted quickly, they acted haphazardly, they involved Johnson in it. And the KGB was in possession, reporting to indicate Vice President Johnson was responsible. There's some other stuff about what a great guy Johnson was. Now, you don't have to believe me, but again, I can prove to you that Johnson knew about the assassination. And the proof is in this picture right here. This is a photograph, very famous, of the motorcade. Now, if you look at this, you see the Dallas police officers, they're looking to the right. This is the president's limousine. This is Clint Hill, the Secret Service limousine. And that is Lyndon Johnson's limo with Senator Yarborough in it, the guy who saw Gordon Arnold. If you notice, there's a couple Secret Service agents already looking back over their shoulder toward the school book depository. There's a few witnesses actually looking in that direction. And again, don't forget, Yarborough, Lady Bird, Vice President Johnson in that limo, right? So here's a close-up of the president's limo, and you can see this is Jackie's pillbox hat. This is her white-gloved hand. That's the president right behind the rear-view mirror. And his fist is clenched up, and she's trying to figure out. And notice there's a few people looking up this way, like what's going on. Now, others have said, well, the guy standing in here that's Lee Harvey Oswald standing in the door. That's another guy named Bobby Lovelace, I believe, that we've established. That was established for a while. Billy Lovelace, thank you. So here's a close-up, and this is the president's arm, his cuffs, his face, that's his mouth, it's distorted, but he's been hit by a bullet. Jackie's got her arm on his arm, top of her pillbox hat, and she's like, Jack, what's going on? She's trying to figure out what's happening. But then you go back 2 limos in the same picture, and you see Senator Yarborough, and you see Lady Bird. Where's Vice President Johnson? Did he get beamed up by aliens all of a sudden? No. The fucker is, he's ducking. He knew as soon as they came around the corner onto Elm Street, the shots were going to start. He knew, and that is proof. The wink is proof that they had a game going. That is, to me, that's proof. That's proof. Now, a couple of other weird things. Finish up here real quick. I'm probably over time already. Dave, where's Dave? Did you leave? Okay. Good. I can keep talking as long as Dave left. This is President Kennedy's Oval Office. He inherited that very tasteful blue-gray rug from his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower. It was very much to Kennedy's taste. The Oval Office was gray and blue and very dignified. And the president used to, because of his bad back, injured in the PT-109 incident, he used to meet with world leaders and stuff in the Oval Office in his rocking chair. It was like his throne almost, right? But what most people don't know is that when they left for Texas, there was a secret surprise planned for the president when he returned. You know what the surprise was going to be? They were going to remodel the Oval Office. Ooh, okay. Well, I wonder what it looked like. Looks like a pool of blood. This is Masonic, Rosicrucian, Illuminati symbolism, death symbolism. Now, on top of that, this doesn't even show you what it actually looked like because these curtains were red. They were blood red, just like the blood red carpet that they put in there. And some of the Kennedy people came back and said, you got to get those down right away. That looks like blood dripping from the walls. They couldn't do anything about the carpet. Now, guess who was in charge of planning the remodeling of the Oval Office? Lady Bird Johnson. And nobody told Jackie and nobody told Jack that they were going to remodel the Oval Office while he was away for the weekend in Dallas. They knew he wasn't coming back. And then Johnson, having stole his crown, the foolish king, is the one who wears the crown of the king before him, as the song goes. He also stole his throne. The Masonic symbolism of this is it's right. What can I say? Okay, he's sitting in his throne, on his throne, swimming in his blood of his predecessor that he murdered, and he kept that for several years. Okay, that's Jack Ruby. Oh yeah, there's lots of pictures of what, this is the Dallas Police Department and the School Book Depository. Now, I get this a lot. Was George Herbert Walker Bush involved in this? Because we know Bush went on to become director of the CIA. George Herbert Walker Bush was not that important. It's also really cool to think about that Bush's name is not Bush. Prescott Bush is not his father. His name's actually Scherf, and his father was a high Nazi official in World War II. We've got pictures of George Bush or H.W. Bush at the age of 14. But a lot of people think that this guy standing right here could be Bush, right? So these are pictures taken outside the School Book Depository. The profile is very similar. The hairline is the same from the period, the thin tie. Notice the nice patterned suit. Bush didn't really wear that. But as it turns out, that's not George. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. Guy on the left is Aleister Crowley, well-noted Satanist, right? That, of course, is Barbara Bush, right? Some people say it wasn't always a girl, but I don't know if that's true. But we do know one thing. We know Barbara Bush's mother, Pierce, was hanging out in the 1920s in London with a guy named Aleister Crowley, who liked to have a lot of orgies and do a lot of fun stuff like that. And then suddenly she came home and married some high socialite, and then very quickly had a baby girl, I guess, who was Barbara Bush. So people think this could be George Herbert Walker Bush. Oh yeah, the whole doppelganger thing is awesome. I got to do that sometime. It's not. It's actually Dallas Police Detective Ira Trantham is his name. So that's not so. Now Bush there is in the new document dump from 2017 that Trump put out, Bush did call the FBI, said he thought he had some relevant information to the assassination. Yeah, I'll bet. Because he was connected. He wasn't maybe at the top of the food chain then, but he was connected. Drove from Tyler, Texas to Dallas. Now, I suppose it's possible the number he called from could be faked. They could have diverted the lines to make it look like he was in Tyler, Texas, but it's pretty solid that he was there about 4 hours away and came there later. There's some other weird stuff. Kennedy issued silver certificates, right? And the red is indicative of that is backed by assets, by silver or gold. Get used to this because you're going to get new money pretty soon and it's going to look like this. It's not going to be paper or monopoly money anymore. So there's some stuff like this. And there was actually, this is a bizarre story. There were two Japanese businessmen found that were busted trying to cross the Italian-Swiss border with $138 billion in bearer bonds and had Kennedy's picture on. This is not them, but it's what it supposedly looked like. With Kennedy's picture on it, the red numbering of gold-backed securities, and the space shuttle and the moon on the back. And the total that they had was $138 billion, which just happened to be the exact amount of money that was left over in the TPP funds that Obama had authorized for economics. So nobody knows what that was all about, but it was pretty weird stuff. The point is that it's not a question of who wanted to kill John F. Kennedy. It was more like who didn't want to kill him, because everybody wanted to kill him. The Federal Reserve wanted to kill him. The CIA wanted to kill him. MJ-12 wanted to kill him. The Mafia wanted to kill him. The Cubans wanted to kill him, but none of them would have. I mean, think about it. You kill a president, you are going to get heat on. The people that are involved, you're gonna have everybody in the world watching it, because look at it. Here we are 60 years later. 60 years later coming up. And we still don't believe the official story, right? So I don't think any of those reasons were enough. I think it's pretty clear to me that it was the extraterrestrial thing, allowing ancient alien technology, and let me just say alien technology, to fall into the hands of the Soviet Union was a big enough reason to take the risk of killing the president. And they haven't got away with it yet. They haven't got away with it because we're still talking about it. So Sergei Khrushchev said, I think that if President Kennedy had lived, we would be living in a completely different world today, because he feels his father, who was then removed shortly afterwards. I think when Johnson became president, he made for the removal of Nikita Khrushchev from being the premier of the Soviet Union a requirement, because he was removed very shortly after Kennedy was killed. That we would be living in a completely different world. And in that context, there is a speech that's on the internet, okay? And I don't know if it's authentic. I can't say that it is. But if you listen to the words, it's in Kennedy's voice. It sounds like something he would have written. And there's even a rumor that this speech was in his pocket, that this was the speech he was going to give in Dallas at the Trade Mart on his way to give when they killed him. I don't know. I can't prove any of that. I'm just going to read to you what it says because I don't have it. So, yeah. Okay. Let me speak. I don't have it. I thought I had it. Okay. Sorry. Wrong presentation. But it says basically that we have been visited. And we believe these visitors are friends, not foes, that this is going to be a difficult time to transition, and we will make mistakes along the way. But I believe that we can conquer all these problems, and that we are ready to live in this new world that's going to be created with us and the aliens. So, again, I don't know why it's not on here. It's probably buried 50,000 slides further down. But I believe that's the biggest reason for killing the president. So, anybody have any questions before I get out of here? We'll talk about.
We have another microphone.
Okay. But I can just yell the answer
Yeah,
back.
repeat it for now.
So go ahead.
It's called capitulation. It just came out by a general that did it, that was involved in everything that Trump has done. And it even states in there, documents the fact that they claim that Biden died in September of 21.
No, I don't know about that.
If you get a chance, everybody who
You
watches.
know, I mean, there are people who say that
Yeah.
that Trump was an admirer of Kennedy, and that he has been protecting John F. Kennedy Jr., who faked his own death in 1999.
Watch it.
We don't know if any of that.
Watch it, make up your own mind. It's
Yeah.
called Good,
Okay.
GOODLION
Okay.
.TV.
All right. Anybody? Yes, sir.
What information do you have on Alan Dulles regarding Kennedy's assassination?
Well, I mean, Dulles is the Byrne memo. Dulles is the author of the Byrne memo. Again, Dr. Bob Wood has gone back and has looked at other memos Dulles wrote, and the tone, the setting, the word usage is absolutely Alan Dulles. So the Byrne memo basically says, this guy's been making inquiries, which we cannot allow. It talks about how assassination is part of their purview under MJ-12, and it basically says, without saying it, we need to get rid of this guy. So he was actually, it looks like, he was putting this out to other members of MJ-12 to get everybody to vote to approve or disapprove it. We don't know the results of that. We don't have those documents, but we have this.
Thank you.
So Dulles was deeply involved. Yes, ma'am.
So killing Kennedy didn't stop the Russians or the Americans from going to the moon.
The point was, it didn't stop us from going to the moon. The point was that the Russians were not able to get their hands on the technology that we brought back. And again, if I had more time, I would show you. There's pictures of stuff from Apollo, that the astronauts took of stuff that they ain't rocks. Okay, they're mechanisms. There's some sort of alien technology that I'm positive we brought back and said, oh, we brought back some moon rocks. There's bizarre, especially Apollo 17, that landing site. There's a hexagonal, there's a mountain there shaped like a hexagon. Looks like half of it was blown off. And there's just junk everywhere. As an aerospace engineer, I look at this stuff and I can see that it's mechanical, not geological. So that's why they didn't want them to get their hands on the technology.
Is that the speech he was going to give?
Oh, yeah, there's the speech. How the hell did that? I think I accidentally hit the button. Okay, should I read it real quick?
We got one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you heard of the documentary from a few years back? It was called From JFK to 9/11.
Yeah.
I think it's a rich man's truth.
Yeah, I don't, again, I think the first 45 minutes is great and everybody should watch that, but I think they got everything about 9/11 and the Kennedy assassination basically wrong after that. That's just my opinion, but I'd gladly talk about it. So, I mean, look, you have all these different theories. Some guy says he was in a storm drain, and that shot's impossible. I mean, you're not going to be able to shoot Kennedy in the head from a freaking storm drain. The grassy knoll, having stood there, some of those pictures were mine, standing behind the picket fence. I might have been able to make that shot. A good marksman would have definitely been able to make it. So all I can say is I believe I can really strongly, conclusively prove that Oswald was in a 6-4 window shooting, and that J.D. Tippit was on the grassy knoll shooting. And 2 of the shots hit him. Okay, so what he said, my fellow Americans, people of the world, today we set forth on a journey into a new era, one age. The childhood of mankind is ending, and another age is about to begin. The journey of which I speak is full of unknowable challenges, but I believe that all our yesterdays, all the struggles of the past, have uniquely prepared our generation to prevail. Citizens of this earth, we are not alone. God, in his infinite wisdom, has seen fit to populate his universe with other beings, intelligent creatures such as ourselves. How can I state this with such authority? In the year 1947, our military forces recovered from the dry New Mexico desert the remains of an aircraft of unknown origin. Science soon determined that this vehicle came from the far reaches of outer space. Since that time, our government has made contact with the creators of that spacecraft. Where did Laura go? Just as her moment. Though this news may sound fantastic and indeed terrifying, I ask that you not greet it with undue fear or pessimism. I assure you, as your president, that these beings mean us no harm. Rather, they promise to help our nation overcome the common enemies of all mankind: tyranny, poverty, disease, war. We have determined that they are not foes, but friends. Together with them, we can create a better world. I can't tell you that there will be no stumbling or missteps on the road ahead. I believe that we have found the true destiny of the people of this great land, to lead the world into a glorious future. In the coming days, weeks, and months, you will learn more about these visitors, why they are here, and why our leaders have kept their presence a secret for so long. I ask you to look into the future, not with timidity, but with courage, because we can achieve in our own time the ancient vision of peace on earth and prosperity for all mankind. God bless you. If that doesn't get you shot in the head by MJ-12 of the deep state or whoever, nothing will.
The world would have changed in a couple hours.
The world would have changed in, like you say, Brad, literally hours. And so I don't know if that speech is real, but like I said, it sounds like Kennedy's voice, and it makes sense to me. And there are people who say that it's authentic. So, you have a question?
Wait,
About the authenticity of the speech. Is it only based on a recording, or are there written documents that you can trace the authenticity?
I have not been able to track where this came from. I do not know where it came from. But I will just say that whoever wrote it, if it's a forgery, it was written almost in Kennedy's own hand. This is the type of speech and the type of language he used. That's all I can say about it. I will tell you, I believe that it is something he had prepared. Yeah.
Here you go, man.
Because, I think the reason he spent so much time at Forrestal's grave was that he knew he was about to embark on a very risky policy process, because he wanted to change things. Yes.
Well, I was just thinking of what he was coming, this is authentic. So before that time, remember in the 50s, they were having who was the one author who wrote all the Mars stories? So
Ray Bradbury. Yeah.
Ray Bradbury.
Mhm.
So think of all the stuff that was being put into everyone's minds, Twilight Zone. So
Right.
space visitors were bad.
Right.
Rocket science was coming. So I'm sitting here thinking of that narrative that was being built.
Yeah. And I mean, again, you don't need this speech to justify it, because what he was already doing with the Russians and being willing to share what they found, that was enough for them to say, we gotta pull the plug. It may not have been the sole reason why they murdered him, but the cooperation with the Russians, those 2 memos, that was definitely the straw that broke the camel's back. Definitely. That was it.
Didn't you want to end the war?
Well, yeah, he wanted, he didn't really think Vietnam was such a great deal, and the Bay of Pigs had been a fiasco. Don't forget, everybody that talks about Kennedy tries to sort of, pigeonhole him or put him into like their category. I'm just the same way. I'm an aliens guy. I think it was aliens. Oliver Stone was in Vietnam, so he thinks it's Vietnam. It's not Vietnam. It wasn't important enough. They could have had another war somewhere else. So, they all probably had reasons to want to get rid of him, the mob, the mafia, but that's a big, what would have happened to the mafia if it had been revealed that they were behind the killing? They would have been wiped out. So much for your, should I say this? Probably not. Casinos in Vegas and all that. No. So, but this is big enough. This is big enough, and that's what strikes me. Is the other reasons are not big enough.
The surgeon testified before he died something about how Kennedy was shot.
Yeah, and he believes he was shot from the front. The surgeon or the emergency room doctor, and there's a new one now going where people are trying to say, oh yeah, he got hit in the head, but it's just grazed him and he survived the headshot. And literally, the emergency room doctor said, I looked at this is gross, but what was left of his brains basically fell. So no, that's not true. He was killed by that shot, and it's just that it feels like there's a lot of crazy distraction out there right now, So.
Did they try to preserve his brain like they said they did Einstein's?
The story I heard is that, they kept it in the National Archives, and it was then given to Bobby Kennedy, who put it into the grave with his brother in 64, 65.
What about swapping out the bodies?
Oh, that stuff, I don't know. The swapping out the bodies thing, it doesn't make any sense. There's also people that try to say that the Kennedy autopsy photos are J.D. Tippit, not John F. Kennedy, because they look exactly alike. And I'm like, I don't think they look very much alike, other than that they're both men with, about 35 or 40 with dark hair. I don't know. I don't think any of that stuff really holds up. And again, I just focus on this particular line, like what can I prove? And if you look at the documents and their authenticity, and you look at the visual evidence, that Marie Muchmore film, that when I realized what I was looking at, I was like, holy crap. And I didn't do much to that. It's not like I'm not some Photoshop expert, but you can see the hair is pushed up because the bullet has struck him. There's already blood coming out. Yeah. It just hasn't exited out of the back of his head yet. So that proves it was a shot from the front. Because if it was a shot from the back, it was the back of the head that would be disturbed. So
what about Oswald saying, I was just a patsy, I was set up for this?
Well, yeah. And in the sense, I think he was a patsy because, he had orders to kill Tippit. There's no question in my mind. And then I think he began to realize, probably when he saw Ruby around the Dallas police station. Again, if you look at the films, Ruby's all over. He's in places he should not be, right? I think he started to freak out a little bit, probably is what happened. And he's like, don't let him kill me. But they didn't anyway. So, yes, sir.
Do you have a full presentation or documentary yourself you're making?
I would like to do that. Anybody got $250,000 to finance that? I already have an investor, an investigator, Steve Doran, that I want to work with, police investigator, who's very skeptical of all this stuff. And again, I got about six copies left, half a dozen of the book, which goes into even more detail on all this stuff. And no, we did not fake the moon landings. The moon landings were real. We went there to get alien technology. Well, the first mission, we went there so Buzz could consecrate the moon as a Masonic temple, but that was the main mission. So. Anybody else, or do I need to get out of here? I think I've gone over time. Yes, ma'am?
How do you get through the Van Allen belt radiation in a non-anti-gravitational?
Okay, well, the Van Allen belts are made of basically two kind of charged particles, alpha particles and beta particles. Alpha particles can be blocked about 99% effectively with plexiglass. Beta particles can be blocked with plexiglass and aluminum. The lunar module had plenty of that stuff on it, and they were traveling through at about 25,000 miles an hour. It took them about 45 minutes. They also knew where the intense regions and the less intense regions were of the belt. So they had a course that was programmed to go through the thin areas. And radiation is damaging. There's intensity and there's exposure time. So the exposure time was very short. The intensity was actually way less than it would be at the peak because they knew where the holes were. And they had studied that with various satellites, and they had shielding. So I worked on a show called Truth Behind the Moon Landings on Science Channel, where I played the crazy conspiracy guy, right? And they paid me and they put me on TV. So no, because I felt like I know that we went to the moon, but I had to pretend like I didn't. But I did it because I knew we would get to the truth in the end, which is that we went. And we studied that radiation stuff. And there's, they also were wearing dosimeters to basically measure their exposure. And their exposure was higher than normal, like about what you would get if you were a worker at a nuclear plant, right? Like 1.8 rads on average. So, and that's literally, there are reams of I think it was every 60 seconds, they pulsed those things and recorded them. So it's all there. And unless you think somebody made all that up for, hundreds of hours on every mission. I don't. I think they were able to get through them. And that's a question that everybody gets. It's funny, I wrote a Y-Files episode. Have you ever seen that channel, the Y-Files? I wrote the Kubrick episode for them, well, most of it. And, AJ didn't get around to the radiation belts. And I'm like, dude, if you don't address the radiation, everybody's going to say, well, what about the radiation belts? Just like 9/11, no matter what you show people. Well, what about building number 7? It's like WTC-2 fell on top of it. That's what happened. Poured molten aluminum all over it. Anyway, so I'm convinced it was not a problem. It was not a problem.
Coast Radio with George Newry.
Oh, he's been a bunch.
Yeah, a bunch of times. Yeah, a bunch of times. Anybody else?
So just finally, my great presentation, by the way. Kubrick was filming scenes. I think he went to the moon too. I actually met Buzz Aldrin at a trade show once, and I'm kind of following him around, and he's like, "Who's this tall guy following me?"
Yeah. Isn't this
And then finally, I got a minute with him. I talked to Buzz one-on-one, and I said, what I knew at the time was that there were orbs that were following the capsule back. And I asked him about that. And he just gave me this steely, blue-eyed look. Because he punches people. If you question him and say, Bart's the Bible, you went to the moon, he'll knock you out. I was like, don't punch me, Buzz. But did you see orbs? And he just didn't deny it, didn't confirm
right.
it. But wouldn't it be possible, though, Kubrick had the set. They're doing 2001 Space Odyssey. As a hedge, they took pictures. Some may have gotten released.
I don't want to disagree with you in public because I love you, but no. No, because the thing is, 2001 didn't look like the moon. Their sets didn't really look like the moon really looked. And the other thing too is all I can say is this: every bit of evidence I've been shown regarding that just doesn't hold up. I mean, Jay Widener doesn't understand the camera settings on the Hasselblads, and what he thinks is a line is actually sort of a natural blend from the focal length of the lens, and it's just they didn't need to do that. But if you look at it, and one of the things I did with my moon books and stuff is I've gone over hours and hours and hours of moonwalk tapes, right? And there was a location on Apollo 17 near the North Massif, which is this hexagonal mountain I mentioned earlier, right? And in front of it is a V-shaped depression called Nansen, which NASA calls a crater. I'm like, that ain't a crater, that's an entrance, right? And they drive up there on the second day EVA. They drive up there and they park the rover and they get out. And then NASA remote controls the camera and they spend the next 20 minutes looking at everything except whatever the hell the astronauts are doing. And I think they're trying to get in the door down there. And then when it was over, Gene Cernan says, well, we haven't been able to look around any more than you've seen. And I'm like, we didn't see anything. so there's a lot of that. So I think it's more that we did go, but that they manipulated what we saw. We now know that there was a secret EVA on Apollo 12 when they first landed, because they had a much better camera than Apollo 11, where they stuck their head out of the top of the lunar module. Kerry Lyondike or something like that is his name, proved this really well with a bunch of documents. That they stuck their heads out and they looked around to see what you could see in terms of this glass stuff that Richard Hoagland's always talking about, right? And the first thing that they did when they got out of the Apollo 12 lunar module, is they took the color camera and they pointed it at the sun and burned the optics out. Because Apollo 11 was strictly ceremonial. Let's land, let's pick up some rocks, Let's have a Masonic ceremony to consecrate the moon for these nutty Freemasons who were running NASA, by the way, along with the Nazis, the SS. That's a secret society, just like the Freemasons. And then at JPL, you've got Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons and all those black magicians, right? So that was a symbolic thing. And then Apollo 12 was where they decided we're going to try to land in amongst this stuff and pick up some tech. And I think that's what really Apollo was all about, or what it changed to.
Would you comment on the show Skinwalker Ranch that's on Discovery
I
Channel?
don't watch it. I mean, I've talked to Travis at Alien Cons, and some weird stuff happened to him there. Really weird stuff. He got irradiated. He literally did get irradiated. He doesn't know how.
Are there portals?
Oh yeah, probably places on Earth, energetically where things flow, where it's easier for stuff to get through from the other side. Sure. All right, guys, great. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.